I'm Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 224 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today, wherever you're doing so. I want to thank Sinead, Nick Gavin, for coming on last week. We had a great chat about, singing, but about, voice coaching and why apparently, and this is, Sinead has guaranteed this to me so that you can stamp this. We can all sing. We just need to learn maybe our octaves and all that kind of stuff. Go back and listen to it. It's really good. And I'm still on the fence about we can all sing. I'm not saying I can sing, obviously, but some people I've heard and they can't. But a bit of coaching maybe for Sinead. Go check it out. You can buy us a coffee, by the way. There's a link in the description and all that, and YouTube. Subscribe to that if you would. But our guest this week is a chocolate sommelier, and her name is Shobitha Ramadasan. How are you doing, Shobitha?
I'm good, Derek. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm actually no. I know this is going to come out a few days after we record, but I'm actually sweltering in this room. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Are
good.
you?
I know I'm fine. It's nice over here. So
Oh. Does that mean you have a bit of a fan or some aircon going on? Because I'm like honestly roasting.
no, it's not. It was bad during the afternoon, but now that things are. It's okay, but you've got to remember, Derek. I'm Malaysian, so you can take a girl out of Malaysia, but you can't take a Malaysian out of the girl. So
Yes, and this is one of those things that comes up a lot of times when I'm like I was born in Ireland, but I think I'm particularly Irish in the sense of temperature wise. I think 15 is grand. I think 15 is 15 is like top temperature for me. And then I think I get a little bit antsy around 20. But also the thing is, the kind of slanted roofs and that, and because I'm kind of in an almost like an attic, I think I'm roasting that. I wanted to ask you as well. Did you see the aurora borealis yesterday?
no, unfortunately, I missed it.
Yes,
But
all
I've
right.
seen all the beautiful pictures today. It's all over.
Mm.
Every social media platform, and kind of kicking myself that I didn't get to see it myself. But maybe the next time. I don't know. Did you get to see it?
I didn't, and I'm the same as yourself. I saw it online, but I didn't know it was happening. Now that's my own fault for kind of not keeping up with the news. But apparently it's happening again tonight. But that's 11:30 is very late for me. And I was thinking it was on it like when I saw the pictures and stuff. I saw the people outside, and it looked amazing, and all that. And I thought they were all after getting up at 2 or 3 o'clock or stuff. Because I know the people get up, and my mum did, by the way, for Darkness into Light, and thank you to everybody who did that, of course. But I thought they were all kind of getting up in conjunction and knocking the two off the list, but it was 11:30, but it's not that. Maybe you can do it tonight. I don't know.
I wish. Well, hey, I have a 7-month-old, so at this point, my time doesn't even belong to me.
Yes.
So, I think that it could be right outside my window, and I could still potentially miss seeing it.
Yeah. Oh well, look. Yeah, it's priorities, isn't it? But you mentioned Malaysia, and we always start off with the question of could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Sure. If I can make it as short as I can. So I'm Malaysian, and it's important to understand for context that Malaysia is a multiracial country. So people often get confused because I'm of Indian descent. So,
Hmm.
some people, when I meet them, will be like, "Are you from India?" And the answer is, I'm not. I'm true and true Malaysian. And I spent the last 10 years living in France. So that's
Hmm.
like another layer of confusion for people because they're like, where have you moved from? And not moved from Malaysia, I've moved from France to Ireland. In terms of upbringing, what can I tell you, Derek? It came from a pretty pretty middle class family. My father was a researcher in agriculture, funnily enough, including cacao, which was one of his specialties before he moved on to other things. And I think in typical, I may be stereotyping a little bit, but in typical Asian fashion, the emphasis was always on education and ticking a lot of boxes as you grow up. And so I ended up becoming a lawyer, and I never really even questioned why I ended up becoming a lawyer. It was just one of those things that you understood that you had to do. And of course, being coming from a very a conservative Indian family, there's only three professions which are worth doing. Either you're an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. So for me, like the options were quite limited. So I ended up becoming a lawyer. And funnily enough, that was the thing that ended up bringing me to France, which just kind of goes to show that you never know where your life is actually going to bring you to. It was completely unplanned. So that's basically the as brief as I can
Mhm.
keep my upbringing, conservative, pretty conservative, yet at the same time, I would say not the usual upbringing, because when you grow up in a country that has so many cultures and so many traditions all living in
Mhm.
one melting pot, you grow up with this mishmash of very different values. So, like for me, when I was growing up, it was quite normal for me to break it down to a very simplistic example.
Mhm.
It was quite normal for me to be having Chinese food one night and Indian food one night and Malay food another night. And it was like the most normal, natural
Mhm.
thing in the world. And I only realized that it wasn't that normal when I started meeting people outside of Malaysia who
Mm.
were, oh wow, that's so almost like, the famous word exotic. It's
Is
not exotic for us.
yeah.
It's actually pretty regular for us.
Is is Ramadasan then? Would that be a Malaysian surname, a regular, or would it be Indian?
That is a Hindu name. That is
Okay.
that is actually a Sanskrit word.
Oh, didn't know
Yeah,
that
so it's
now.
pretty ancient. My whole name is Sanskrit, so it's which is pretty normal again for like a lot of but this is just maybe like one level up because it's not
Yeah.
the most common Sanskrit name that my parents chose. So
Okay.
yeah.
I'm glad I asked that question now because I mean we literally learn something new every day. Another thing we always ask is when did you first become aware of mental health?
Well, that's a really easy one for me to answer because that awareness came for me, I would say, 2018.
Hmm.
And it was because I started feeling a lot of burnout, for a lot of reasons. I mean, it had been a long time that I had been away from Malaysia, so I had what I remember the doctor said was expat burnout, which was a completely new term for me. Never heard that one before.
No.
So as you said, you learn something new all the
Yeah.
time. And then, of course, there was professional fatigue.
Mm.
I was an extremely young person in a role that was relatively senior. And I think being in that position, going back to the Asian conservative background of being this, always achieving these milestones of, by this age, you have to be like this, and by this age, you have to be like that. And, I had it in my mind that I was not allowed to fail and that
Right.
I had to just really make sure that I did better than my best at whatever price it was.
Mm.
And of course, that's not sustainable because life is all about balance. And I didn't know balance at the time. And so I realized that something wasn't right. And I ended up having to actually get some help because you know, the one thing, and I've heard this on your podcast before, mental health is a taboo subject, especially when
Mhm.
you come from certain conservative backgrounds. If you tell someone that you're seeing a therapist, they're like, "Oh my gosh, what is wrong with you?"
Yeah.
And I think that is so outdated thinking. I think everybody who feels that something is not right, if you have access to it, you should get the help that you need. There's nothing wrong with it. So for me, it was 2018. It was really at a period of realizing that I was burning out and that I needed help, and that there was this concept of mental health. And it's not the same thing as what a lot of people will have you believe that there's something wrong with you.
Mhm.
Because if that's the case, then it's quite possible that there's something wrong with a lot of us.
Yeah. I think there's, because it's good mental health and bad mental health, and the access point is quite, it can be quite fragile, I suppose. Um, and the way you speak of it is, I haven't really heard people say anything um anymore to me about the idea of, oh, there must be something wrong if they're going to therapist, because
Mm,
everybody knows at this point, who knows me, and the kind of inner and outer circle, I've kind of put it all out there.
mm,
So I don't hear it anymore, but it when I hear it coming back to me, like from yourself and from other people who've come on the podcast, that even only a short while back, like you were saying, in 2018, that people were kind of talking about it in those ways. It's kind of still kind of quite sad and very much a backwards kind of look at things, especially when we talk about, you know, a few bad days or a year where we take on so much that we
Mm.
could go in the opposite direction that we want to go in. You know, it's sad to think that there's still people there kind of going, well, there must be something wrong with this person and that, you know, it's a little bit
Yes.
disheartening, I suppose.
Well, I do feel though that, one of the things that came out of the pandemic was I feel that we made a leap when this happened because so many people started having issues. And I think that that opened up a lot of people to the idea
Hmm.
of mental health and getting help. There was almost like to me at least, like a turning point because I started meeting a lot of people around me who were telling me things like, yeah, I'm attending a support group or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And people was becoming more open to sharing these
Hmm.
kind of things, and I do wonder if the pandemic hadn't happened, would we have made such a big leap?
Yeah.
I actually don't think we would have. I
I
think we would still,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of thing. I think a lot of people resorted to things like Zoom, and I only like, and I'm not, saying that people wouldn't have done it face to face, but I genuinely think it's easier for me to talk to someone and say, "Oh, I'm having, a really tough time mentally or something like that through this kind of I'm not saying on a podcast, obviously, but face to face on Zoom and such. But when you're sitting down in a room with someone, I think it is a little bit more difficult. And but that has allowed that kind of progress to where if you can start the conversation through Zoom or wherever it might be, it can continue then in person, and it can become a more open thing, and that's obviously for the good. Um, I want to obviously talk to you about chocolate. But so when did this kind of love affair, I suppose, with chocolate begin?
Ah, you know, I think like so many people, I, you think chocolate, and I straight away think of my childhood.
Mm,
Except
yeah.
that at that time, the chocolate that we knew was, it was quite simple. It was either like Cadbury or Nestle, and it was the stuff that you would normally find in the supermarkets. And honestly, even growing up, I wasn't that much into chocolate because I grew up in such a warm climate that, you're more inclined to actually reach for an ice cream than
Yeah,
a piece
of
of
course.
chocolate. And but chocolate was always at the background. And I also remember because my father being at that time he was like the head of the cocoa research and he had continued that work for some time. He would come home with like different experiments of cacao pods and things like that. And it never really registered to me, as a child
Oh, you've got a
that there was a link between chocolate and about it. So fast forward to when I finally made a move to France for
we're getting a few.
professional reasons, and that was about like 10 years ago. Chocolate is huge, and you okay, Derek? Because I see
Yeah,
that the
yeah. You just pause for a second. Go on. Sorry.
oh, chocolate being such a huge part of French culture, like I mean, if you've been to France, when you throw a stone, you're gonna find a chocolate tree on the tasted before. So I already like they crossed that very fine line from just liking chocolate to making it into something that was far more, you enjoying chocolate. I'm sorry, Derek. I'm just a bit distracted because I see that internet connection is not stable. So tell me if at any point you're
Yeah,
not catching me and
it's
you need me to
it's
repeat.
I might need you to go out and come back in. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll fill in
Sure.
the space. Don't worry. I'm
Okay,
good at it. All
let me
right.
try. Okay.
All right. So sorry about that. Now I literally am sweating on my forehead. That's that's I think it was like 22 degrees today or something. It's not that much, but to some people it's way too too warm to to maneuver. But Shobitha probably coming back in now any second. So but I'll carry on talking as it were. We're back.
And
Sorry.
I'm back.
Sorry
Great.
about that now. Okay. Apologies for the interruption there. So we kind of got to the point. They started cutting out when you talked about your dad was bringing back the cocoa, cacao. That's it, isn't
Cacao.
it?
Yeah.
Cacao. Um, yes, sure, go from there.
Yeah. So, at that time, the link between fruit and food never really hit me, and so I was quite ignorant about it until I got to France many years later,
Mhm.
because I had ended up basically being assigned to France for my job.
Okay.
And, that's where I really discovered that chocolate could be so different from what you find on the supermarket shelves, like everything that I knew about chocolate was slowly shifting. And so I started enjoying it from a very different point of view.
Mhm.
Not just the buying a bar and enjoying it on a Friday night in front of the TV kind of thing, but really taking my time because there's one thing that I think the French really know how to do well. It's to slow down when
Mm.
it comes to their food, to really savor it, to really enjoy. I mean, obviously they're good at many things, but I'm just zeroing in on the one food aspect. And so, that's how I started really getting exposed to a lot of different types of chocolates. I discovered there were things like origins. I never knew that something that was made in Papua New Guinea could be so different from chocolate made from cacao in Madagascar,
Mhm.
for example. And even then, it was still a bit of a mystery. The real jump for me came, and that's interesting because we're talking about mental health just now. It came for me just about 2018 or 2019, where I started getting really curious because I would see these bars of chocolates in all these chocolatories around Paris, or at the time I was in the south of France, and it would say things like tasting notes of
Mm.
blackberry and fruit, red fruit, and all these like really fancy categories and leather. And I was like, what are they on about? I mean, I know that they're different, but how do they know? How are they getting those notes? And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. And the reason that I did this was because as part of this mental health journey that I didn't even know I was starting at the time, I wanted to do something that would be so immersive with my senses so that I could sort of shut out what was happening around me and find a tool to help me go within, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to do that with something that was alcoholic because I think that could be a slippery slope if I were to start depending on that. Because for me, the chocolate, to be quite brutally honest about it, it was escapism for me.
Mhm.
Like I would sit down with this bar from, say, uh, cacao in Tanzania, and I would feel myself transport, like, okay, so I'm sitting here, this is the closest thing to the land of Tanzania, like all the concept of terroir, the soil, the climate, everything that contributes, just as it does for wine or even craft coffee. This is like how I'm going to travel without leaving my house,
Mhm.
and that's how it started for me. And what I realized was that every time I was sitting down with a different chocolate, it was very meditative for me. And it came for me at a time as a tool, which was very powerful because one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize when you are battling mental health issues, like whether that's anxiety, which I had, or depression, which I also had, is that it is not that easy for someone to just tell you, like, go and sit down and be mindful
Mm.
for 5 minutes. It's like, okay, how do I do that? Because what you may not realize is that I really don't want to be present in this moment right now
Yeah.
because I'm not very happy with my reality. So I would actually want to find a way to sort of disconnect with that so that I can reconnect with myself. And that's where chocolate came in as a tool for me because I found that I couldn't do the work. I couldn't sit down and do the meditation. I was struggling to sit down with the whole mindfulness activity, because at the time, and I remember at the time I was seeing a psychologist to help me through a lot of like work stress and things. Like I said, I said I needed help, and I ended up seeing someone to do talk therapy. And she said, okay, this is how you do it. And, I went home and I tried to do it, and I found myself thinking about the same repeat cycles
Mm.
again. Okay, like this happened at work, or this is making me sad, or there were all these things which would just come back. When you have something as a tool, I find that you're able to sort of channel all your energy and focus into that tool. And so it helps as a medium instead of you sitting with yourself. And so I did that for many, many months. It's a very, it's sort of like a cheat code to being more mindful of yourself because You need to use your senses. You need to use your sense of smell, sight, taste, touch, sight. So in that moment when you're doing a chocolate tasting, it's very easy to lose yourself into the exercise of doing that tasting. So when I talk about things like, when you see these fancy, I say fancy because this is what a lot of people like to tell me, like this regular chocolate and this
Yeah,
fancy
fancy
chocolate.
chocolate. Yeah.
Fancy chocolate, you know what it is because you'll know it in this tasting notes, the same way that you see on
Mm,
wine and coffee again, when they tell you what you should be expecting. Um, when you see tasting notes and things like that, what I wanted to know was how do I detect these notes? And so
mhm,
I decided, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. I got myself certified as a chocolate taster. A lot of people don't know that that is a real thing. You can be certified as a chocolate taster. It's a lot of training, it's a lot of sensorial exercise. It's very much in the same way that how wine sommeliers would learn
mm,
about wine, but except you're dealing with chocolate and cacao, especially specialty chocolate and cacao. And when I started learning it, I realized that I liked teaching people about it and telling them what I was doing because
mm.
I found it worked for me. And if it worked for me, maybe it was going to work for someone else too. And sure enough, people were telling me like, oh, I tried this chocolate that you recommended. I did what you said, and I had a really, really nice time with it. And now I'm trying it with different chocolates and blah, 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 blah. Life
Mm.
goes as the rest is history. And that's basically how I got into chocolate. It was more, if anything, it was a combination of my love for a certain type of food
Mhm.
and my will to find a way to do more with it and just sit down and scoff it.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know? I find it fascinating the idea of the way you've linked mental health with it because when I was given the opportunity or told that jujitsu would be good for me, the idea of someone trying to choke me was like, I don't know if this is going to be particularly good, but what it did was it's that immersive thing of like if someone is trying to do that, well, then everything else is forgotten. The anxieties, the depressions, whatever's going on in the day. And the way you described that about chocolate, like, is it also kind of made me think of, the way you said, so there might be certain um fruits that you might taste in the chocolate and whatever it might be, and you're going looking for that, and you can't really be wrong, right? If you don't find them, you can't really be wrong. You just that's palates are different. You didn't pick out that particular thing, and it's the same as with jujitsu. You can't be wrong. You might get choked 3 times, but you're still getting up and you're going again. It's not a thing that like it's not a right or wrong kind of thing where it becomes even more pressure on top of you because that's what it does. Like we all like invite more and more pressure, and I just find that fascinating that you were able to think of that in the way with mental health and bringing it to the levels that you have done. And when it comes to this, is kind of bringing it back to kind of, I suppose, the more kind of basic levels of how do you know what a good like I'm going to say it's going to sound like a silly question, but you'll probably be able to answer it perfectly. But how do you know when you have a good piece of chocolate?
Um, so there's a lot of ways to answer this,
Hmm.
and it's interesting that you're asking this question as well because I'm right now in the midst of judging for the International Chocolate Awards, and a big part of this is basically determining whether what you have in your hand is a good piece of chocolate or not. And clearly, I mean, there are very strict standards on how we do this. It's very similar to for example, if you are a coffee, do you like coffee, Derek, or you're not a coffee
I
person?
like tea. I like
Okay, well,
tea.
tea
Yeah.
applies too.
Okay.
So, I mean, you know that there's a way to grade tea, especially the specialties teas. There's certain criteria they look for, whether it's mouthfeel, like astringency, like how tannic it is, how rounded. So what I can tell you is that when you have a piece of chocolate, I'm going to give you like the cheat codes now to what you can look
Good.
for to determine, because the one thing that people don't realize is that just because a chocolate is supposed to be a fancy chocolate.
Mm,
In other words, it's coming with a very fancy packaging and it's coming with an even fancier price tag. Doesn't actually mean it's good stuff. There's
okay.
actually a lot of bad chocolate in the market, but people are afraid to point it out because they're afraid that they are making a mistake. Like, what do I
Yeah.
know about good chocolate? So if this is supposed to be good, I'll just go along with it. It's not true. So the first thing we do when we're judging or assessing a chocolate is We go down to the flight or fight response. When you take that first bite of chocolate, do you like it? That's literally the first question. Do you like it? And then there's four categories. Yes, I like it. No, I don't like it. The third one is maybe, and the last one is I'm not sure. And then there's a whole bunch of criteria. But I just
Mhm.
find it so interesting that it's such a basic question that we don't ask ourselves with anything,
Yeah.
really. Whether it's other foods, whether it's gonna go a little extreme here and say, like, even life choices, like how many of us consciously ask ourselves, like, do I like this book? Do I like my job? Like there's so many
Mhm.
things we just don't question because we're not really taught to do
Mhm.
that a lot of the time. So that's the first thing you do. You take that first bite, and how do you react to it? How do you respond? It's almost like a knee-jerk gut reaction. You'll know whether you like it or whether you don't like it, even if you don't know the reason for it.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing you do. The second thing you do is you're going to use your five senses. Okay. You're going to look at the chocolate. You're going to look, does it have a nice glossy exterior, like a shine? That's what we
Mm.
call the tempering. It's a process to make sure that the chocolate is in a good condition. That's basically when you break a piece of chocolate, you know how you get that snap?
Mm.
It's like really crisp almost. You're looking for that, so it should be glossy, it should have that snap. And if it doesn't have those things, you need to check why. It could be, and there's so many reasons for this. I
Yeah.
mean, look at specialty chocolate. It could be the kind of sugar that they're using. Is it regular sugar? Is it coconut sugar? They're very different things.
Mm.
Could it be that it's a different type of cacao? People think that there's only like one type of cacao. That's not true. I mean, there's like so many different genetics out there. There are like 11 or 12 different categories now and still discovering.
Mm.
I mean, people talk about grape varieties all the time, but wine, you come to the cacao world, you won't be able to keep up. There's so many different types. So you're looking at it, you're looking for the gloss, you're listening for the snap. So that's number two. That's the second sense.
Mhm.
You've used your eyes, you've used your ears. Now you're going to use your sense of smell. You're going to smell the aroma. Do you like it? Is it chocolatey? Is it peppery? A lot of the time, it might be a little bit peppery,
Mm.
depending where it's coming from. If you get a chocolate, say from Java or Indonesian origin, you might get something that smells very leathery. And the reason for that is because in the monsoon seasons, they don't have enough sunlight to be able to dry the cacao beans. So they dry it over wood fire, and the smoke comes up and
Oh,
infuses the beans. And that's why you get the smoky, leathery aroma from it, and it comes through the flavor as well.
okay.
Okay, so you're going to use your sense of smell for that as well. And then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to put a piece of it in your mouth. And depending on the type of chocolate it is, if it's a plain chocolate, you're going to let it melt slowly. You can chew a little bit if you like, but for the most part, you let it
Mm.
melt. If you have a kind of chocolate that has stuff in it, like nuts, cacao nibs, fruit, this is what we call inclusions, then you're going to chew.
Mm.
So a lot of people don't know that, because the reason you do that is because you need to get the flavor out of whatever has been added into that bar. So you need to chew it, and you need to chew it quite fast. And then it's kind of like a chocolate pairing in your mouth.
Mm.
So that's what you do. How do you know that you have bad chocolate?
Mhm.
So the first thing, the dead giveaway for any chocolate that's bad is the sweetness level.
Oh.
You can either check the label. If sugar is listed first, you can bet your bottom dollar this is not good chocolate because they've basically tried to replace a good content of cacao with a good content of sugar instead.
Mm.
And sugar is cheaper than cacao, which is why it's easier to fill up a product with that. And the second thing is, if you've got too much sugar in a chocolate, it means that they're trying to hide something. And what that normally is the flavor of bad beans. What are bad beans? It's beans that have either been poorly fermented because good cacao needs to go through a very special fermentation protocol. That's actually where the beginnings of chocolate flavors start. If you don't ferment the cacao, you will not get that nice chocolatey flavor. Then there's also the roasting, just like how coffee works, depending on how you roast it, is how you're going to get a very flavorful chocolate. When you buy a chocolate from the supermarket, there are two things happening. You're, we're calling bulk cacao, a commodity cacao. This is basically regular cacao. It's gone through a very quick protocol. We're not making this for flavor. We're doing this for quantity.
Mm.
And this is typically bought by large chocolate companies because they process chocolate by huge volumes because that's stuff that goes out to supermarkets all over the world. Then you've got what we call specialty cacao, or which is what you typically find in the fancy stuff, right? And here's where a lot of different things go in, how you roast it, how you play with it. Everything becomes an art and a science
Mhm.
at this point. You can't afford to load the product with sugar because if you do that, you're basically negating all the craftsmanship and all the hard work from the farming side as well. All the effort that has been put in to make sure that you get this complex bean. When you see a chocolate bar that says like, oh, this tastes like red fruits or nuts or a floral, like some people go like, what the hell is floral? Like I've never
Yeah.
eaten flower.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that go on when you're looking for tasting notes, and there are ways to train your palate to identify it. But the first clue for bad chocolate is sugar. Anything that's too sweet, put it down and
Okay.
leave it aside.
That's perfect. That's a perfect summation. I wanted to ask you, so what kind of, because obviously you've described what you would be telling people who would use your services from the start, like how we should, taste chocolate initially. But what kind of services do you provide?
So I teach people about chocolate. That's
Hmm.
the easy way to say it. But really, what I do is that not only am I showing or teaching people where chocolate comes from and how it all starts from a fruit and how to taste it, my real goal is basically to get people to be more attentive to what they're putting in their bodies and in their
Hmm.
mouths and how they choose to focus on what they consume. Because my hope is that maybe it will start with chocolate, but you'll take those same exercises. When I teach you how to taste something, how to pay attention, how to ask the right questions about the chocolate, I'm hoping that people will take that exact same set of whatever they've learned and apply it to other things because I think we live in an age and time right now where it's so important to know where your food comes from
Yeah.
and how it comes about and what you're putting, whether it's in your body or in your family or your children's bodies, everything now really matters. And we live in a time where there's a lot of cost cutting, a lot of shrinkflation happening, and a lot, if you're looking at chocolate again, I mean, the sugar content is just like being knocked out of the park now,
Yeah.
because cacao has become so expensive. I don't know whether you've been seeing in the news, but what used to be 2,000 per ton is now at 12,000 per ton, and we're
Wow.
thinking that it's going to go up to 20,000 per ton because of climate change and a lot of other factors. We are having a lot of very bad cacao yields, which means that we used to joke about chocolate going extinct one day.
Yeah.
That's not really a joke anymore. That could very well be the future that we're looking at. And there are people already trying to come up with alternative chocolates, things that are made not from cacao. So I teach people how to approach fine chocolate, a specialty chocolate, the same way you would wine.
Mm.
So we learn everything about how it's made, we learn about the history, we learn about the different types of chocolates. We learn how to taste it, how to appreciate it. Basically, building a connoisseur out of you.
Yeah. I want to ask this, and this is kind of like a Daily Mail kind of question. Right. So bear with me, right? So kiss, marry, kill. Okay. Hang on for a second. White chocolate, milk chocolate, dark chocolate. Now I'll go first, just so it gives you a little bit of time to think about it. So, um, uh, kiss, white chocolate, marry, milk chocolate, kill, dark chocolate. How about yourself?
Derek, you are asking me a question
I
that's
know.
that's the equivalent of asking me to pick my favorite child.
I know it's hard. It is. It's horrible. I should have written Sophie's choice in brackets beside it. It is. To be honest, you do not have to answer this. This is one of those questions that I will say because I like to have these little questions that make it maybe a little bit outside the box. But if a music journalist comes on, I ask them for their favorite album, and it's like impossible for them to answer. So if you don't feel that you want to answer it, that is perfectly fine. And I just want to kind of add a little bit to what I was saying about mine. So dark chocolate was never a thing when we were that we would ever buy as kids growing up, like. But my dad loved it, so he'd always get like the black magic Easter egg and that kind of stuff. And so I was always kind of put off that instantly. And Milk chocolate, or sorry, white chocolate can be really, really nice. And I'm talking about like Milky Bars. I'm not talking about the finer stuff, but it's all relevant in a way. And I think, but white chocolate can be a bit too sweet sometimes. And I guess that goes with what you're saying about the sugar content of it. And milk chocolate is like the good old fashioned, when I was growing up, like the dairy milks. And the Cadbury's, like you mentioned, like a crunchy bar with the Cadbury's milk chocolate around it. So that was kind of my thinking. But again, it's like you said, it goes back to like childhood. Your and do you bring that in? Actually, do you bring that in if you're tasting some of the
Mm.
these these world's best chocolates and you're kind of judging it? i- Is it hard to remove like a bias? If, I know you're saying like you like picking when you're like you one of your own children or something like that, but I would like to think that if I went in there, I wouldn't just pick the milk chocolate because it's my favorite. But it's quite hard to do that if it is your favorite, to not think of it as the nicest. If you're like, oh, that's milk chocolate, that's probably the nicest. Do you know what I mean?
Well, what I can tell you is this. Coming back to your point about childhood,
Yeah.
and I think it's a big part again of why I ended up working with chocolate because childhood is such a powerful time in
Mm,
terms of memory. And what a lot of people sometimes don't take into account is that taste buds are so subjective because
mm,
so much of it is actually based on memory. And, you know, that's the reason why I like what you said as well earlier. There's no wrong or right in
mm.
terms of how you do certain things. And one of the things I always tell people at a tasting is that there is no wrong or right. If you don't taste the note that the rest of us are getting, that's okay. You
Yeah.
might be getting another note. It's like the cliche, like I might be tasting raspberry in this Madagascan chocolate. But you might be thinking about the really awesome strawberry pie that your grandmom used to make you when you were 5, and that's the memory coming to you.
Mm,
That's not wrong. The whole point of the exercise is for you to just exercise more than your taste buds. You're actually
yeah.
exercising the mind when you think about it, because it is a very conscious exercise. What am I tasting? What am I tasting? And then you kind of trigger your memory. Does it taste like this? Does it taste like that? So very subjective. So people are very surprised when I tell them that, look, I love a Cadbury flake because this is so tied to my childhood.
Yeah.
Oh, and I remember like last year, when I was like having a couple of moments which were not very easy, one of the things I really craved was a flake or
Mm.
a twirl because let's face it, twirl is just even more awesome because it's like
Yeah.
enrobed around like a flake bar. And people are like, oh my God, but how can you eat this? And I'm like, because look, at the end of the day, that is the appeal of chocolate. It's about bringing you back to a time where joy was really more the norm for you.
Mm,
I mean, I'm conscious that this depends on what kind of childhood you had, but for a lot of people, chocolate is synonymous with pleasure, with
yeah.
happiness. In terms of when you're talking about the different categories of chocolate, I used to be one of those people that hated dark chocolate because I
Right.
didn't like the bitter thing. For me, it had to be milk because milk chocolate was comfort. It
Yeah.
was synonymous with the Cadburys and the Nestle's and the creaminess that there was just this very simple pleasure in a milk chocolate. And white chocolate was really something kind of like the treat, that really
Yeah.
sweet treat that you wanted, but maybe you might not have it every day. But
Mm,
gosh, if you could get a white chocolate, you would be like a really happy kid that day.
yeah.
All of that changed when I tasted specialty chocolate because the fact that dark chocolate, good dark chocolate, isn't bitter just blew my mind. Like
Yeah.
I had no idea that this was even possible. Like there are chocolates, dark chocolates that taste like really juicy pineapple, for example. And if you're ever in the market for single origin chocolate, you would want to look for chocolate made from cacao from Belize. This
Okay.
has a typical pineapple, really, it's almost like a juicy flavor in your mouth. You will not get a single note of bitterness. And then I tell people this and they don't believe me. And then I give them a piece of chocolate and then they're like, oh wow,
Yeah.
you're right. And similarly for, the white chocolate, the good white chocolate doesn't really taste very sweet, surprisingly, because it's mostly cacao butter and milk powder. And Milk chocolate, you would be surprised. That can actually be sometimes quite complex and not exactly the kind of chocolate you want to reach for when you have a bad day,
Oh,
because sometimes you just want, as I said, you want a simple pleasure. You don't want
yeah.
to sit down and have, well, first of all, specialty chocolate isn't cheap, so it
Mm,
is an indulgence. I'll definitely tell you that. It's not the kind of thing you want to just, again, scoff down. So you want
yeah.
to be very mindful with that. This is a very roundabout way of basically telling you that I think that chocolate today is so different from chocolate as we know it that there
Mm,
are too many variables. Your mood for the day, the time of the day,
yeah.
like you don't think you want to have dark chocolate or let's say white chocolate. I don't think you would want to have white chocolate first thing in the morning for a
Yeah.
lot of people. It's just a bit too much. So there's so many variables in how you approach chocolate. What I would say is that try to I mean, again, it is definitely a bit of an indulgence, but I feel like it's worth it because you're putting good stuff in your body. Good
Yeah.
chocolate has just cacao and sugar, maybe cacao butter. It shouldn't have anything more than that.
Okay.
If there's anything else in there, that's really a question mark. And when you start exploring things like that, the question that you asked me, Derek, about which one would you go for? It won't even be a question anymore
Okay.
because they're all so different from each other, and it's the same way I will tell people that, look, don't try to compare the specialty stuff with your favorite chocolate from the supermarket. I am not here to yuck anybody's yum, as we
Yeah.
say. They're two different products altogether. They're not even comparable, like if you want to have that Cadbury because, you're feeling like pretty nostalgic. I just want to have my twirl. Go have your twirl. The one thing that you would need to be conscious about, though, is that not all chocolate in the market is ethical, but that's like a totally different conversation, and that would probably take a whole other podcast to
Yeah,
talk about.
we could do another one. Don't worry. I do like the idea that talking about corporate events and private parties that you do with tastings, and we've talked about the idea of wine tasting. And, not everybody is going to be into that. There's going to be a certain amount of people, say if it is a corporate event, there's a certain amount of people who don't drink alcohol, and of course there's going to be some people who don't eat chocolate. But what I would say about the chocolate thing is I think everybody can try the chocolate because of the fact that, some people don't drink alcohol for religious reasons, whatever reasons it might be.
Yeah.
But I think with chocolate at least, and we're moving away from like twirls, even though how nice they are, but we're going into some other kind of higher end chocolate that I think other people can try, and it's something new. Like it's like you hear a lot about wine tasting, and of course they're great events as well. But I think not that they're new, but they're kind of new to me, and they'll be new to a number of people. So I think that kind of what you're doing in that sense is a brilliant thing.
You know what I love the most, Dirk, when I do one of those tastings? That you can feel in the room at that moment the excitement. Everybody's inner child has
Mm,
suddenly made an appearance. Everybody's suddenly all excited. There's smiles, there's openness. It's almost like a switch has gone off,
yeah,
and for that short time, even if it's only an hour, I can sense in the room, even the guy who's not into chocolate is curious. What is this? And they want to taste everything and they want to engage. And I think that's just probably the icing on the cake.
yeah.
That again, when I say chocolate as a tool, it's not just a tool for yourself. I think it's a brilliant tool for also connecting with other people. And that's the reason why I also like to do group tastings, because it's nice to see people, whether they're colleagues, whether it's a private party, you notice that the bonding with one another,
Mm,
it's like having a room of children, because again, it's almost like someone just pulls a curtain aside.
yeah.
And I love seeing that effect. It's like bringing out the best of
Yeah.
people's uh you know uh, memories almost.
Yeah. Yeah, well, exactly what it is, though. It's, awakening the young person in that and tasting
Mhm,
something new like that. Um, how do you, so if you were contacted by, say, a private party,
mhm.
how do you choose the chocolate that you're going to bring with you?
Well, I normally ask a few questions,
Okay.
like what are you after? Do you want to do something that's going to surprise you all the way? Then I will choose some really
Yeah.
like out there chocolates. Or do you want to maybe do something a little more conservative? How many chocolates do you want to do? How much time do you have? Because some people might say, like, look, we just want like a 45-minute. It's like
Yeah.
sort of like a filler between things. Then I know, okay, I've got to be like smart about this because I want them to enjoy it. I don't want them to be overwhelmed. But if someone says to me that, no, 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 we are really into geeking out over food stuff, we want to really go into details, then I'll like bring out all the really tough stuff,
Yeah,
like the chocolate from Brazil that looks like a milk chocolate, but is actually a pure dark chocolate. And people go like, "Oh my God, we thought this is dark, but it's like lighter than the milk chocolate. How is this possible?"
yeah,
So it depends. So for me, it's all about what the person wants because the goal is that when I leave, they should still feel for days after that, maybe even weeks, like, "Oh, I had a really good time. Like I learned so many things about chocolate that I didn't really know." And now it's like, that moment that they passed, I want that to remain a good memory for them.
yeah,
So and it could be anything. It could even be like a hen's party, like that's
yeah,
becoming more and more popular now, like chocolate and champagne. People are all into all sorts of pairings and things like that. So for me, it's basically boiling down to the experience that the person wants,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
what for.
The longer, I suppose, the longer that you are in that world, the kind of easier that becomes for you in general, because you'll get, you'll be able to kind of off people's answers, be able to see what you need to bring or what kind of chocolates people might be in, and
That's
I
absolutely true.
I do like. I'm not going to ask you what your favorite ever chocolate was, because that's again the same kind of questions I asked before. But I just, you know, was there a moment, or is there a moment that you can recall where you, and I think we can all just this with food in general, but like with chocolate, where you thought to yourself, this is the best chocolate I've ever eaten. Now, it might have been surpassed since, but it
Mm,
was there a moment, like, again, I suppose it goes back to the idea of, I was talking to someone earlier on about my favorite chocolate. It is a Caramac bar. If you've ever had a Caramac bar, I don't know. Like, it's, they're gone off the production now for some reason. Hopefully it's nothing to do with, you know, something
mm,
dodgy. But I love Caramac bars, right? And people ask me, well, why is it like, why the Caramilk bars by Cadbury's and the Caramac bars? Why, like, what's the difference between the two? And I said, there's no comparison, right?
mm.
And the Caramac bars has this kind of sediment in it. And I don't know if that's a good thing. It's kind of a chalkiness in it. And
Yeah.
in most bars, I would not like that at all. But for whatever reason, with the flavor of the Caramac bar, that is like the greatest piece of chocolate that I've ever had. And they're gone again. And it upsets me greatly. But that was just me to kind of, I just wanted to get upset about Caramacs. But do you know what I mean? Like when you've
I
had a piece of
do.
chocolate and you're like, wow.
I do actually. And when you're talking about that sandy texture, so most likely that actually came from the milk powder.
Mm,
I actually know what you're talking about because I like that texture too, which I know is not the politically correct answer to give people because a lot of the time when you go by the criteria of judging good chocolate, it's supposed to be a very smooth,
smooth. Yeah.
very velvety melt, like almost buttery. But there's something to be said about a chocolate that has that slight grainy texture. I don't know what it is, but it is so satisfying.
Mm,
And it's the kind of chocolate that you feel you can't get enough of.
yeah.
So, and I was just gonna say that if you like Caramac, I really, really think that you have to try this chocolate. It's made by the Proper Chocolate Company. They're based in Dublin.
Okay.
They're a bean to bar maker. Don't know whether you've ever heard of them. If you haven't, you're about to be in for an absolute delight.
Good.
They make a white chocolate bar, which is actually called a blonde chocolate because just like the Caramac, it's a
Mm,
caramelized white chocolate bar. Try this
I
chocolate
will.
and come back and tell me
I
what
will.
you think.
Sold. Sold immediately.
It is a brilliant bar. It doesn't have that graininess that you're
Hmm.
looking for, I will tell you, but it has a whole load of amazing, amazing flavor. Now, coming back to what you said about
Mm,
the chocolate that actually really did it for me, there's a maker, it's a UK maker, and it's called Duffy's. And you
okay.
can get Duffy's chocolate from the chocolate shop in Cork in the English market.
Right.
So she sells amazing chocolate. She's also available online. If you don't go to Cork market, you can have a look at what she has, and she has its chocolate. And I remember that the first time I tasted this, it tasted like golden syrup, like kind of like a treacle. Like the first thing that came to my mind was like treacle pie.
Mm.
And it had that sandy texture that you're talking about, that slight little,
Mm.
it's almost chalky, it's almost a little bit gritty. And I remember I couldn't stop thinking about this chocolate for days, and I still remember the origin. It was from Honduras. And I
Okay.
remember thinking, I didn't know there was cacao in Honduras. And then, of course, I started hunting every single bar possible that had Honduras cacao, but none of it compared to this slightly sandy, gold award winning maker, mind you. And every time I taste that bar until today, because this maker has been around for ages, every time I taste that bar in a blind tasting, I could tell you right away this is a Duffy's bar because I remember that moment so clearly when I
Mm.
tried it and thinking, oh my God, this is what chocolate should be.
Yeah.
It hit all the spots, the chocolatiness, the treacle, the texture, the length. Like a really good chocolate will have good length, just like
Yeah.
a glass of wine, it doesn't disappear and leave that sugary taste in your mouth like what a Cadbury's would do. It would
Hmm.
leave like as if you've still got a piece of brownie in your mouth almost. And this chocolate had that. And of course, as you said, there's been so many more bars that have come since then. The most recent bar being Neri Nogs.
Yeah.
So they're in Northern Ireland. I don't know whether you've heard of them. They make a truly, truly excellent chocolate made with cacao from Togo.
Oh.
And it's they do this lovely bar. It's actually called the Irish Collection, and one of the bars has lavender in it. And the lavender actually comes from just behind their factory.
Oh,
And
really?
it is for someone who doesn't like lavender things, I
Mm.
can tell you that this bar just knocked my socks off. It
Wow.
was perfection in every sense. Like if I had to judge a bar like that, and when we judge, it's all blind. We don't know who the makers are.
Of
But
course.
if a bar like that came on my table, I would be like, this bar deserves the best possible award that it can get because it comes back to what I said about, that first instinct, do I like it?
Hmm.
Some bars will just make you go, oh my God, I love this. I
Yeah.
don't just like it. And for me, that's the mark of a good bar.
Yeah.
Do I still think about it? Do I want to eat more? Is each bite different? And of course, then, it goes back to that focusing, that little mini meditation that you're going to do by yourself, whether you're in your office at work or whether you're at home and you just need like 2 minutes away from your
Yeah.
kid because you need to just recenter yourself. It's it's really that moment of coming back to yourself using something as simple as childhood memories, taste buds, and just focusing on yourself.
Beautiful. Speaking of that, and this is probably not going to be applicable to you, but what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, when I had spare time, you
Yeah.
mean? Because right now, like said 7-month-old baby is a 200% job. I'm surprised that I'm even able to do any chocolate judging this time.
Or
Uh,
podcasts for that matter.
well, that's what I'm learning right now. It's all about prioritizing
Mm.
and just getting a little bit more organized. If you have to taste chocolate past midnight, you'll do it because you're passionate about
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
enough about it. But right now, this is going to be such a cliche answer, but my spare time is really getting to know my daughter.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Uh, e- every day is different with her, and I am just fascinated by every little thing that she does, and it's fascinating to me because I was never a baby person, which also
Yeah.
tells you that
Yeah.
people can really change.
Yeah.
S- that is the new spare time. I mean, old me would have told you that spare time was doing everything chocolate related,
Yeah.
whether that was I was doing a lot of consultancy, I was writing. I mean, like basically anything that was related to chocolate, I was in it.
Mm.
And all those things have admittedly taken a bit of a backseat right now while I enjoy this very fleeting stage
Mm.
with my daughter because I know that it goes probably too fast.
Of course, it's a beautiful answer. Where can people find you, be it online or wherever else?
I'm honestly doing not the best right now with the social media presence. I'm actually really terrible with social media, but you can find me on Instagram, the chocolate sommelier
Hmm.
underscore Ireland, not to be confused with chocolate sommelier in the US.
Hmm.
So please look for the underscore Ireland when you go on Instagram. And from there, you can even check out the website.
Yep.
One thing you can do if somebody thinks that they might be curious to try a tasting, because at the moment I'm quite focused, or at least hoping to focus more on online tastings because it's convenient for
Of
me.
course, yeah.
It's also convenient for people who can't come down to Dublin. Like,
Hmm.
you can just get online for an hour and we do the tasting together. So a good way if you think you might be interested is to just get on the newsletter. And once I start planning, because I know it's going to come soon, I can tell I'm not going to be able to stay away from this for long. Uh, there will be announcements of when the next season of tastings are happening, and it's pretty cool. I've had some good feedback there.
Mm.
Basically you get a kit delivered with all the different chocolate samples, a little bit of
Okay.
this, a little bit of that, the aroma samples, so that you learn how to identify the tasting notes and all of that. It's a really cool way to spend like an evening if it's raining outside and you don't really feel like going out, or maybe you're just kind of like wanting to cozy in and
Yeah.
not like do anything that requires too much effort of you, which is why it's like great in the winter or in the autumn because
Yeah.
most people want to go out during this time.
Yeah, and they
So
want
I'm
to eat
excited.
chocolate. Everybody.
Well, yeah, chocolate is so totally cold weather treats, right?
Yeah. But like winter yeah. And of course, like even coming into Easter, it's still chilly enough, and like we love chocolate around Easter. What I'm going to do, and I'm going to, so unfortunately, I didn't have any chocolate here with me today, but which is very lack of I don't know planning on my part. But the episode's coming out on the 22nd. So when people are listening to this, they will be on the 22nd. I promise everyone, and I'll put myself through it. I will be eating some nice chocolate that day. I promise you that.
Oh, that's that. And you know what? We can even do a tasting together
I'd
whenever
love
you,
that.
yeah,
When
if you,
we're gonna do the second episode, giving out about the rising prices of cacao, so we'll eat chocolate while we talk about it. Is that right?
I'd be happy to. Any excuse to
Yeah,
taste chocolate, people.
so Bitsa, you've been an incredible guest, and especially giving over your time on a Saturday night. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Derek. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'm really happy to know that there are people doing great work like what you're doing about mental
Oh,
health,
thank you.
because I love that this is now such an interesting topic for so many people, and there's so many ways to approach it. And I think the more people that get talking about this, the better off everybody will be.
Absolutely. I've been very lucky. The people have come on and talked about it and been so open about it. Could you stick with me for 1 minute? I'll close this out and we'll get a quick photo. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I also have to always thank John for his tech support. I always thank my mum, my dad, granddad, Jer, and Calvin for all the obvious reasons. YouTube, subscribe if you would. Like I said earlier on, we're on Instagram and Facebook. And then just the regular podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts. I suppose if you're listening to this already, you don't really need any of those tips. But our lovely faces are on YouTube, so there you go. There, you get that one for free. But yeah, obviously everyone who tuned in today, thank you for so much for doing it. So, Bitsa, thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Derek.
All right, everyone, we'll see you next week.